Well, this movie literally punched me in the face in the best way possible. It's somebody wrote like it's a trip to hell that you never come back from, and you kind of get that sense from. I read a lot into Billy Moore's story, and even the subtitle of it being a nightmare is very fitting. And so I'm always fascinated with why actors and filmmakers choose to make a story at a certain time in their life. And so if, say, somebody looks at this movie and it sticks out in your filmography 10 years down the line for its tone, what would you say the reason for why you chose to do this movie at this time in your life?
Yeah, it's a good question. For me, I think it's a process. Every film I did is about violence, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I'm doing this job, also trying to talk about violence and fight against violence, And I think this film for me go into like a specific time in my life where I need to talk about this and to express this kind of rage inside. Mm-hmm. So the story is set up in a prison in Thailand, so in a kind of violent environment. The previous film I did was child soldiers in Liberia in war, so this was the same kind of. Mm-hmm. But I think the character, changed, the child soldier were more like 15 years old, and now he's 27, 28, so the violence is going through a process of how you deal with violence. That's what I'm interested to, as a filmmaker. But I have the feeling as well that this change, getting older. So I'm working on my next film called Addicted to Violence, which is another step into violence and the relationship you can have, And then I think maybe I'm going to do different films, but I really have personally the feeling that it's a process, and this film comes in the middle of almost the end of my work on violence, or the brutal violence, physical violence, into films.
Mm-hmm. What about for you from an acting standpoint?
I'm most impressed by performances that require an actor to go on a physical journey and perhaps push their comfort zone. So for me, films like Hunger with Michael Fassbender and Tom Hardy and Bronson, those kind of films, I was, I guess, subconsciously looking for a film like that. I'd done a young offenders film called Offender, which kind of, I guess, sort of touched that territory a little bit, and it was one of the harder, sort of more satisfying projects I've done. So when I heard about this one and watched Jean's work, it was something I really wanted to get my teeth into. Part of the reason why I do this job is to challenge myself, as much as possible. And as I say, those performances are the ones that have impressed me, and I felt like I had the chops to try and do that. And then also meeting Billy Moore and kind of seeing the vulnerable side to him, and also the animalistic side to him, I thought it was just a fascinating case study, one I was itching to get my teeth into.
Mm-hmm. Well, the animalistic nature of the film really stands out, even from the first shot of the film. Like, you just see your back and the way that the muscles are just kind of, it just feels alive in a way. And so is it more of a challenge for you kind of stepping into this where there's not a whole lot of dialogue to it. It's mainly just like a visceral experience of making you feel like you're just like a fly on the wall in this guy's life, compared to something where it may require, more memorization of dialogue. Sure. Do you feel like you can express yourself any better with a role like this?
Yeah, I feel like the main sort of challenge for this role was just to make sure the prep was done before we got on set. So kind of making sure I was really comfortable in Billy's accent, Liverpudlian accent, north of England. Getting to a place where physically I felt strong, felt like I could punch a few people and have a fight. So that I did feel like that. So when I got to set, I was very, I spoke in the Liverpudlian accent the entire time. I was very kind of just relaxed. I could just sort of be in the moment, and the way Jean works, and the way we did this film, because most of the other actors were sort of non-professional or first time actors who didn't speak any English. Mm-hmm. It meant that it was largely improvised, and there was a lot of free camera movement and stuff like that. So it was just important for me to be well prepped, so that I could just be and just sort of inhabit this world and live in it, the world that Jean's sort of created and put me in. So yeah, I guess just as much of the work just before I got there, so that I could just be fully kind of relaxed and present.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of like the free camera work, did you kind of enjoy that challenge of kind of thinking of more? There's a lot of boxing movies out there. There's a lot of prison movies out there. I mean, it's a tight space to work in, but you got to think of like different ways to kind of make it feel like a refreshing film when it's like the fighting sequences. Filmmakers have different approaches. Everything's very tight with the way, kind of claustrophobic. Can you talk a little bit about like your choice for doing it the way that you did?
Yeah, it was a challenge for me because, as you said, there is a lot of prison movie and good prison movie and boxing movie the same. So I really wanted to find something different. I like, my films kind of being in the middle of documentary, realistic, and fiction. Mm-hmm. So I felt like maybe usually the boxing scenes are more like done with editing. So you fake, kind of the situation with a really speed editing and shortcut and stuff. So I say maybe we should do the opposite, doing long take. So doing choreography with the actors and shooting, if there is 3 rounds, shooting the 3 rounds in a row, and not cutting with the camera to make this kind of effect. So the whole film, in fact, I shot, long shot. Every scene was first, long shot. I thought like editing, all the shots together, we're gonna have the film. Mm-hmm. My problem is I did it and I had a 6-hour movie, so I said, there is a problem, I need to cut, so finally I cut, into it. But the boxing scenes were shot, like this long shot, and they had to really fight, because, when you don't cut the camera, you feel like, the first, you feel like, okay, I'm doing it, and then you say it's long, because 10 minutes in a ring, it's quite long. Yeah. And I wanted also for the audience to feel how it could be to be in a ring, as a boxer, to feel the kind of violence, the brutality of it, and not just an entertainment, from outside with people screaming, encouraging and stuff, but more being like always inside the ring with him, really close, and to feel, what he could feel, as a boxer. With also the sound, was really important for me, like to hear the breathing and not just the punch. Mm-hmm. And everything around, like being in his head, immersed as an experience, more like watching from a distance, from outside.
Well, we're out of time, but I have many more things I'd love to ask you, but I appreciate your time and great luck with the
Thank you, man.
Yeah. Thank you.